It's great to see so much energy still after our very long day yesterday, but some of us were remarking it was exhausting and energizing at the same time. Just all the great information and the camaraderie, but very, very full. Well, as you know, today we have a half a day for the conference as we're finishing up, but a lot of great things are in store. And for those of you who weren't here yesterday, my name is Joan Kerr, and I'm the chair of the board of directors of the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council. Today we're going to have something that if you haven't been here before, and I know over half of you have not, SPLC has this very special event called the Silly Awards. And I think as we all get to understand more about it, we will be participating more in future years, nominating people, and even competing for receiving a Silly Award. But that's a little bit later in the program, but it's not too late to submit or to do something silly. And it is just that silly. I mean, there's nothing more to it. This is going to be at the final event. Also want to remind people our exhibitors are still out there. If you haven't seen them over breakfast, please take some time during the break to go through and thank them for exhibiting, see what they are eager to share with you. And a reminder that you use pound SPLC 17 when tweeting or posting on LinkedIn about today's program. You can follow at SPLC Council on Twitter and the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council company page on LinkedIn. Let's see if we have any of that here. No. Okay, now it's diversion time. I'd like to invite Tad Radzinski from Green Circle Certified, the Summit's Zero Waste to Landfill certifier, to announce yesterday's diversion rate. Hopefully good news.
Good morning. How's everybody doing? All right, so I'm very excited to give you the unofficial numbers because, you know, these all have to be fully validated and everything, but currently our waste diversion from landfill is at 96.4%. So I think that's very impressive. And I want to thank all of you because you all have a big role in this. And I also think our process worked very well. Designing waste out was a big part of it. Just a couple highlights. The first night reception, you all did pretty well. Over 200 pounds of empty beverage containers. So you hit the bar hard, so that's really good. And compost-wise, food waste is typically a large amount of waste that comes out of an event like this. We're over 700 pounds right now of food waste that's going to compost. So that's very helpful that we have that set up. And some of the things we're seeing in the trash are things like the bathroom towels, the little cocktail napkins, a few of the Starbucks type coffee cups, but most of them have been going into the zero waste boxes that will get recycled. So anyway, we will, Michaela and Nate are downstairs right now. They're weighing everything from yesterday, so we'll have more numbers. And just one part of our process for doing this is we actually then will go visit today the material management organizations, the folks that are taking the waste. Michaela's going to the composter today and to the MRF. So we're following the materials to make sure they're actually getting to where they belong. So just want to let you know. So keep up the great work, and we're very excited about it. So.
Thank you, Tad. So I guess we need to pay a little closer attention with the compostables to put them in the zero waste bin, it sounds like, and not in the garbage. So great reminder, and we're such overachievers on the bottles. It's really special. As you guys may have noticed, SPLC is a very dynamic and changing organization. Our goal is to be inclusive and welcoming and to accomplish as much as we can. There certainly is a lot more to be done, and I'm happy to introduce now two leaders who have really put their heart and soul into SPLC, who are going to be telling us about that something more, Sam Hummel and Dr. Anastasia O'Rourke. As was announced last night, Sam has been promoted to CEO of SPLC. Yay, Sam. And Anastasia, who is the immediate past board chair and has been so helpful to me, and really I'm so very grateful to her for all of her knowledge that she shares. She continues to be on the board and a longtime collaborator with the council. So please welcome Sam and Anastasia.
Well, we are a dynamic and changing organization. As you can see, my title changed yesterday and again this morning. No, actually, that's just a typo. Welcome this morning. This is great to see everyone again. So many of you are still here, which is fabulous. We weren't sure this year going to a half day if it would, kind of thin everybody out, but it got a lot of engagement still, which is great because this is an exciting session. This is, I hope, we'll see. You all are going to be really excited about what we're going to talk about right now. So I should also mention that an update to the script, we also have on stage with us Tim Hopper, who is the responsible sourcing manager for Microsoft and also a board member of SPLC, who's going to share his perspective on this program as well. So yesterday we heard a lot in the morning session about purpose and about the potential that we have and that this group has to make a huge difference in the world. And a big part of potential is knowing when you realized it, right? And that requires being able to verify that the impact you think you're having, you are having. And in many different spaces, one of the tools that's been developed to help us do that efficiently is standards, certifications, and labels. We think that there's a lot of opportunity in the sustainability space for standards, certifications, and labels to help us reach our potential, and we don't think we're there yet. We think that we can make it a lot bigger. So, with that said, I'm going to move along to a couple of questions about this. How many of you are purchasers out there who are already using standards, certifications, and labels as part of your purchasing? Great. Now, how many of you, and let's keep a show of hands going here, how many of you would like to have a list of sustainability certifications, standards, and labels that have been carefully vetted to ensure they credibly address relevant impacts? Lots of hands. How many of you would like a way for your distributors and e-catalog providers to label sustainable products in a credible way? Okay. Lots of hands, great. How many of you would like to be able to write policies that prefer the most credible sustainability standards available at that time and that will become available in the future? Okay, great. How many of you would like an easier way to track sustainable spend using credible sustainability standards for products, services, and suppliers? Okay, awesome. Lots of hands. It's great. So we think that the program we're going to tell you about today is going to deliver all of those things. But what's really important is it's not just for purchasers. So for the suppliers in the rooms, how many of you would like a way to know which sustainability certifications, labels, and standards are worth investing in and achieving because purchasers trust and prefer them? We've got some suppliers in the room. All right. How many of you would like a credible independent authority that you can point buyers to when they don't know the merits of the rigorous sustainability standards, certifications, or labels that you've earned? Got some suppliers. Right. How many of you would like a way to identify sustainable products in catalogs and directories in a credible and efficient way? Yeah. Especially distributors out there, got thousands of SKUs. So this isn't just for purchasers, and this isn't just for suppliers. This is also a program that we think is really going to benefit standards developers, certifiers, and labelers. There's a lot of potential to grow the market for credible sustainability standards. So for those of you out there who are in this role, how many of you would like a way for purchasers from many organizations to use consistent, clear, transparent, and fair criteria when determining whether or not to prefer your standard certification or label? I see some hands. Great. How many of you would like a way to have confidence that if you improve or evolve your standard to meet that criteria, you will earn the preference of those many organizations? Get me. All right. And it's not just for purchasers, it's not just for suppliers, it's not just for certified standards developers, it's also for the public interest community. Something in it for everybody in the marketplace. So if you're in that role, how many of you would like a way to encourage purchasers to use credible sustainability standards, certifications, and labels without having to go from buyer to buyer, convincing each one individually? How many of you would like a central place to go to push the application of strong credibility principles to the evaluation and recommendation of sustainability standards? Okay, great. Awesome. So the reason that we think this program is going to do all of these things is because it addresses a fundamental problem that's shared by everybody in the marketplace who is seeking to advance sustainability. And that is a lack of clarity in the marketplace about which sustainability standards, certifications, and labels are credible. And at SPLC, we like to talk about developing shared solutions to shared problems. And so we are proposing today to establish a transparent, fair, and independent service which will critically evaluate and publicly recommend credible sustainability standards, certifications, and labels using a rigorous methodology developed through nearly 10 years of multi-stakeholder input. We're calling that program Sustain. That's a placeholder for now. That's what we're calling it. So the Sustain program will consist of 5 services. Number 1, an evaluation service for evaluating sustainability standards, certifications, and labels. Number 2, the publication of recommendations as a public service. Number 3, the provision of that recommendation data for integration into ERP systems and catalogs using an API. Number 4, an education service where we'll wrap around these recommendations comprehensive training and education to help organizations understand how to use standards and certifications as part of a comprehensive and strategic sustainable purchasing program that prioritizes impact. And number 5, market intelligence service, where we'll be able to provide greater visibility and information for both purchasers and standards certifiers and developers and suppliers as to who is using what in the marketplace and where we can drive adoption and who's getting adoption. We think that these services and this program has many synergistic tie-ins to SPLC's other programmatic work that you already are familiar with, especially our Chapter 4 category guidance with the product and product category guidance, as well as the SPLC benchmark, our trainings, resources, webinars, you name it. So just to give you a quick sense of what this could look like on the other end, I just made a couple of quick mock-ups here. So you can imagine a database or directory website where you could go and you could search by issue, by impact, by category, by industry for credible certifications, standards, and label programs. You could browse by those same things. You could look by region. If you're a global company and you're interested in what can I find in this region or that region that's credible. So then if you were to drill in, let's say to a product category, XYZ product category, you would find a summary of what are the hotspots that are there that we've identified are the ones that need to be addressed and verified that performance has been improved on those. Those are the relevant impacts that need that type of verification. And then we would identify for you what are the credible programs that could provide that verification. Obviously, you can see there, we would also try to, this is how we would try to wrap that guidance around, or wrap our guidance around process and other strategies that all of this can be fit in to be very strategic, wrap that around that recommendation. And then also, this can easily tie into product research tools so that you can go straight from these recommendations to databases and registries that will help you figure out what the market availability of the product is. And so some of you may have seen the Ecomedes booth that's next to our booth out there. They've mocked up a prototype product research tool that just using the guidance version 2.0. And you can imagine if you go out there and take a look at that, how this program could feed into that and take it to the next level. There we go. And then this is just a quick mock-up of an example of where, you could see an e-product in e-catalog, ultimately looping this in and giving you filters within your e-catalogs where you could filter or flag for your employees products that, qualify with the sustain criteria. So that, I hope, gives you a picture of what this program, what the services will be. There's a lot to how it will operate, and a lot of deep thinking has gone into that, and there's papers and many, many pages of ink spilled on it. So we are very confident that we can do this, but I'm going to bring up one of our experts who's been central to helping us think that all through to explain some of those elements.
Okay. Hi, everyone. This is Anastasia O'Rourke speaking, and it's a pleasure to be up here on the main stage talking about this important topic and how we can really, as a group, help to solve it and move forward. So my company at Industrial Economics is working with SPLC to shape this process and to come up with a really strong both governance structure and evaluation steps and methodology for doing this. And we've had some experience doing this. We actually worked intensively with the US EPA on their eco-labels and standards guidance for federal purchasing, and that was a pilot program which is just wrapping up now. And I'll talk you through a little bit of the history of that and why we can make this claim that some of us have been working on this for 10 years or more. But now is actually the right time to really come together and do this once, do it well, and continue into the future. So yeah, we've also been working at IEC, my company, with a bunch of other organizations apart from EPA, looking at this world of eco-labels and standards, certification systems, rating systems, as I presented yesterday as well, both on the product and service level, but also on the enterprise level. So we want to be able to fold some of that in over time. Which? The big green button. Thanks. So on the 10-year front, the precursor kind of group before the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council was the Green Products Roundtable. And this was a several-year sort of roundtable discussion where we were trying to get our arms around what is a green product. So clearly, in that discussion, the role of eco-labels and standards, as well as just more generally sort of green marketing claims that were completely unsubstantiated in some cases, came out. And out of that, we did come up with several work products together on sort of preferred practices and guidance for eco-labels and standards in that, as well as we gave a lot of input to the Federal Trade Commission on their green marketing claims guidance and came up with a really substantial kind of framework of how to think about all of those different environmental, social, economic issues through a life cycle framework and so on. So there was quite a lot of work that was done at that time. And then we turned that organization into the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council. When we did that pivot, we made it more broad to sustainable, not only green, and we shifted from products to purchasing. So now we're here as SPLC, and I think that was a good move. But in the meantime, the EPA and the GSA, the General Services Administration, partnered on creating some guidelines for eco-labels and standards for federal purchasing, and being able to actually recognize and recommend private or voluntary eco-labels and standards that weren't already written into federal acquisition regulation. So that project then went on, and we just supported EPA on their pilot program by evaluating eco-labels in 3 specific product categories. And there was, I think, over 50 standards that we evaluated as part of that, with great participation by those brave volunteers who went through that process. So yeah, our company was involved in that with that process. And now, over time, SPLC has been building up a really fantastic group of partners and individuals and organizations with really deep technical expertise in this area. It is going to be needed. So as I mentioned, this pilot that was done with EPA, those recommendations have come out. So they cover, and what we want to do with the Sustain project is really base our process and the actual guidelines themselves pretty directly on those EPA guidance. I think we'll need to adapt them to make it not only on environmental and human health hotspots, but also to include social sustainability issues. But the sort of structure and the approach and the evaluation system is going to be, I think, one that we've worked with now, we understand, and we can really build upon. So the EPA guidelines really ensure that the final recommended standard certifications and labels are created through an open and transparent process, that they're effective at addressing the most relevant environmental and human health hotspots. And that's really the piece that's product category or service category by category. And that they're also supported by really competent verifiers or certification bodies. And they're really well-run programs with market traction, which means that as a purchaser, you can rely upon them. So SPLC over this time has really built up a lot of great partnerships and relationships that mean we're now at the point where we think we can do this for everyone. And this includes accreditation providers. So there's already some accreditors who accredit certification bodies, and we want to just build on their work and recognize it and move on. So we're not trying to replicate what they do so well. In addition, there's the important group of the standards developers, the certifiers and the labelers themselves. As Sam mentioned, we are here to amplify their work and get it out into the purchasing community. And we'll need their participation, that is for sure. So there's a lot of different industry sector-specific initiatives that have started work on this area, and we want to be able to build on some of their work. And for example, the Sustainability Consortium, as many of you know, have been working hard on identifying hotspots already for many consumer product categories. So we'd like to be able to build on that research in where it makes sense in those product categories. So that's just an example. And then this will be really facilitated by a whole lot of IT to make sure that we can get into e-catalogs and so on. So we're looking forward to building even more partnerships, and we're actually interested if you have an idea on how and where you can participate in this. Because it's a big group, we do need a governance structure to manage this, and SPLC has been elaborating this over time. So SPLC is a non-profit itself, and we have obviously bylaws as part of that, but we've worked hard when we established the organisation to make sure that this kind of a program can be handled within the existing governance structure that we have with a balanced group and so on, very transparent processes, and that the SPLC Technical Advisory Committee will be a key sort of filtering process through here. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on. So how are we going to support this? So we will need seed funding to build out some of the infrastructure here. Even if we have all the experiences and the pieces in place, we still need to knit it together. Once we have that established, we're thinking of this as a modular kind of thing where we can start to take on category by category assessments. Potentially people could sponsor a whole category, and then we try to move through them over time. So we'll work on that. We do want to emphasize that we think that each of these services that Sam mentioned, the 5 services, does have a revenue stream potentially to support this work. And just a reminder that SPLC is a non-profit, so it's a sustaining SPLC type of revenue stream as well. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Tim Hopper. Oh, thank you. Sorry, I didn't realize that was animated. There you go. And Tim, please tell us your world of a purchaser, how you would use this work. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks, Anastasia. So if it looked like I just followed them up on the stage, it's true. I did follow them up on stage because I really do feel passionately about this topic and about the SPLC. I think the best way to sort of frame it is to ask you first, how many is this your first SPLC meeting ever? Wow, quite a few, so maybe half the room. The rest of you have been here more than 1 year. I learned about the SPLC. It was hosted in Seattle about 3 years ago. And I was busy at work. I'm in Seattle. And I heard about the summit, thought, it's right here, I should go check it out. So I just walked down, it was at the pier, and I went in and I was, I was sort of just blown away with the SPLC, with the nature of the conversations, the overall ethos. I mean, everyone seemed to be sort of on the same page. It was my first year. It's like, wow, this is kind of an amazing organization. I'm in procurement. If any of you are in procurement, it's you can be sort of the lone voice. I had this feeling, working in procurement for 16 years now at Microsoft, that there's this great potential that we can, and we have proven that we can actually affect the world for good. And so it's just being intentional about that, and yet it's difficult in procurement at times to have that common conversations with individuals. And here at the SPLC, everyone was having these conversations, and it was like, whoa, this is great. But then no, it's the first time I was there. It's the Seattle Wharf. It was a beautiful day. There wasn't rain. I thought maybe it was just the one day I was there turned out to be.
We organized it.
But then, we went to the one in DC, and here again, and in many work groups since. And that spirit, that initial encounter with the SPLC has been consistent. That mission-driven organization, that heart that the organization has, it's critical, and it's critical from purchasers for us to get together to have those common challenges that we're all trying to navigate. But I think the one thing that's overarching common is we're all trying to do the right thing, and we need more guidance, we need more help to do it, and I think the SPLC is the honest broker to enable and empower us to do that. So, when I think of the SPLC of why, I think they framed it well, why certification standards are needed. It's chaos out there. I've been looking at this for 8 years, and I still don't know. I have people come to me, and it's like, I've got to try to figure out, is this the right standard? This is the right eco label? And it's difficult for me to actually provide that guidance internally to the non-experts. And so, and even if I did, it would just be someone at Microsoft saying, yes, this looks good. And that's not that powerful, right? We want experts that are independent of us telling us that these are the best things and these are the corresponding positive impacts with that. And so it's very much needed to have this work done. It's needed for all the right things, scale, not just Microsoft creating their own little proprietary thing that suppliers have to do, but they complete it and it works for all of us. So there's all those reasons I think everyone knows of why the body of work is important, and why I think the SPLC is important is it is that mission, it's that ethos, it's that nonprofit structure. I think that gives us a lot of comfort around the motivation of the organization. But also importantly is the membership. It does bring together this big tent of the stakeholders that Sam mentioned. They're stakeholders sort of representing each of these interests. Having all those voices to shape this is critical to have a good product at the end of it. But that purchasing network, having purchasers across from the tech sector to all the different sectors that we work in, make sure that we can get that convergence across those different sectors. Any sector-specific or industry-specific initiatives are rationalized through that, but having that broad view that is important. We're in the tech sector where we have a lot of tech sector focus, but we purchase from every sector. And so having that intelligence across the way we actually put our funds towards is super important. So the purchasers, the suppliers, of course, having their voice. I mentioned the sector industry. And then the track record of SPLC, they've been, at that initial meeting, we were struggling at that point with market assessments, enterprise level supplier assessments. How do we actually make sense of how our suppliers are performing, what's the maturity of our suppliers? We approached the SPLC with a project. Can you make sense of this landscape? They kicked off a project, and over the course of the last couple of years, we looked at a landscape of 500 different players in the marketplace, coalesced down to really the top ones that are out there. So we don't have to just settle, just identify what we think might work, but really look at a structured approach, looks at the right principles as far as sustainability principles. In this case, it demonstrated that we could find the best ones that are impartial, that had the expertise, that had the right models in place to make sure that when we have people look at our suppliers, that we can rely on their assessment of their sustainability performance. And so they've done that work for us. It was fantastic. We're able to, it's directional, something you can put in our procurement processes and execute right away. It's practical, but yet impactful. So, I think all those things, the right organization, with the right members, with the right track record and history to do it. So I'm thrilled about this particular work. It's timely. My leadership wants to see things that we can just put in place with our suppliers. Certifications is sort of that right next step for what we're looking at. And so we're thrilled to sponsor this going forward. So back to you, Sam.
I do just want to go back quickly one slide just to this one, because as Anastasia mentioned, this is a program that will be modular. Part of the reason we're calling it services is because organizations will have the ability to sponsor the development of evaluations in categories or in spaces or issue areas that are important to them. And so Microsoft has issue areas that are important to them where they're trying to get clarity, and they've identified that that's something that they want to do. There's a lot of room to grow here. So they're interested in enterprise level sustainability standards and certifications. I know others are interested in looking at social and economic. Others are interested in looking at services. So where and how quickly this grows will depend a lot on who shows up and says, I want this clarity. And we can help share the effort of doing it and share the expense of doing it as well. It's either we all do it in-house on our own and we each repeat the work and it goes in our staff time, or we share the effort and then it is something that we can all converge around. So thank you for that, Tim. So just quickly, last next steps, so that you know where this is going. The timeline on this is fluid. It just depends a little bit on how quickly folks say, let's, we're in. And we are able to get the funding together to do this. But next steps is after this presentation and in the weeks following, we as the staff and the board are going to be collecting feedback, engaging interest. We will be refining the copious pages of program plan that I already referenced. And then we'll be launching a fundraising fundraising campaign to do the seed capital that Anastasia referenced. And so we will be looking for founders of the program to join us in founding the program. So if that's something that might be of interest to your organization, please let me know. We'll be hiring a program manager and establishing the program infrastructure, and then we will begin the category preparation and start doing assessments as quickly as we can. And that, again, where that will happen and which categories first will depend on who shows up and with interest in what. Just if any of this resonates with you, I want to just put up a few options for how you could think about your organization engaging, yourself personally engaging. So these are a few things that we know we're going to need: program founders, sponsors of categories, sponsors of assessments, expertise for our technical panels. We're going to have an assessments user group. So for those of you purchasers or others who will be looking to put these recommendations into use, we want to have a user group that will help us plan for everything you need to be able to do that successfully, integrate that into your business process and policies and so on. So we'll have an assessments user group. We'll also have a program operator user group. So for those of you who are standards certifiers, labelers, we want to have a community of practice among you who are going to help us guide and make sure that this works for you as well, because it takes all of us. So those are just a few of the groups and few of the ways that we know we are going to have people plugging in. So please, if you're interested in that, you can send a note about that to sustain@sustainablepurchasing.org. And also, if you would like a little briefing document, it's brief, to take back to your organization and share with folks, you can go to sustainablepurchasing.org/sustain and download that there. So that's all for our presentation about this. Thank you all for your attention, and we'll bring Joan back up. Thank you, Tim and Dr. Anastasia O'Rourke, for the fabulous work in helping us get to this point. So thank you all.
Thank you, Tim, Sam, and Anastasia. That was fascinating, and I think we can all agree that as sustainability stakeholders, we need this kind of effort, and we need to be able to rely on credible standards and eco-labels, and I think it's not only us who needs it, but the world needs it. So you will probably have lots of questions, suggestions, thoughts about this, and we are looking forward to engaging with everybody and benefiting from your input on this proposed initiative. So do get in touch with the staff. Now I would like to transition to our keynote debate. And who doesn't love a well-informed, fact-based debate? It's a novel concept, I know, but we're bringing it back here at SPLC. We know that communicating our work in sustainable purchasing to our stakeholders is critical, and metrics are needed. We also know that it's incredibly important to choose the right targets, and that metrics can really drive change in our organizations. To debate some different points of view on this, I would like to welcome to the stage Jason Pearson, President of SPLC, Yamaz Siddiqui, Vice President of Corporate Sustainability from MGM Resorts, Tim Meester, Chief Procurement Officer from Best Buy. These will be our debaters. And we are in safe hands because we have someone with a lot of credibility, backed up by her Yale PhD, Anastasia O'Rourke from Industrial Economics, as the moderator.
Hi again. Well, it's fun to be back and to be talking about a really foundational piece of this SPLC community, and that is talking about metrics and measurement. And it's a funny sort of technical topic, but it actually, there's a lot to debate. And that's why I have these characters here. So first of all, what do we mean by a metric? So metrics, it's a meaningful measurement, taken over a period of time that communicates vital information about a process or activity leading to fact-based decisions. That's what we want here, right? We want fact-based decisions on our sustainable purchasing. And measuring progress towards sustainability in general, it's a busy place. There's a lot of different tools out there. There's a lot of different approaches. And also sustainability is just one of many things that most purchasing organizations, or some purchasing organizations, are focused on. They're measuring all sorts of other outcomes that they want to achieve as well. So we decided to have this debate today because as a community we're starting to get asked more and more, what is the metric for sustainable purchasing? And of course, me coming from my academic background, say, there's not just one. How can you try to characterize so much complexity with one metric? But nonetheless, in many situations, you do get pushed sometimes just to have one. There's various scenarios that can play out. So today we just want to provoke some sort of creative thinking on this, give some insight to you on current issues. It's very much a live debate. We have some key ingredients here to work with. So today I'm joined by Jason Pearson, who is the president of SPLC, Yamaz Siddiqui, who's the VP of Sustainability from MGM Grand, and Tim Meester from Best Buy. So thank you for joining us. And I think the way we're going to approach this is first we're going to hear from Yamaz Siddiqui. Yep. And then Jason, who will provide a different perspective. So we're going to hear some potential options for measuring sustainable purchasing. In fact, 3 options. And then we're going to hear from Tim, who's going to give us the reality check and the story about why and how they even use measurements, metrics and measurements, who he's trying to talk to with those sorts of measurements in his organization. So with that, I think we'll move on. So first of all, over to Yamaz, please. Do you want to stand up for this presentation?
Stand up and
thank you.
Thank you, Anastasia. And Anastasia, when you called us characters, was that a compliment or a pejorative? Okay, great. So I'm going to do a little thought experiment. starting with some questions and some examples, and then lead into a desire for you to take away mainly questions and maybe some answers around this question of what's the metric. So let's use some analogies first. In our sector, we have a lot of work and thinking around the concept of carbon emissions, and we have a methodology where you take all of these, you take multiple things, and you aggregate them through the GHG protocol to one idea, metric tons, MTCO2e. That's the absolute metric. How do we measure improvement over time in carbon? It tends to be absolute reduction in percentage. That's what we want. We want overall reduction in carbon in order to limit greenhouse gases and climate change. So in this example, 20%. What about waste? We're trying for zero waste at this conference. What's our metric? Well, it's two metrics. There's an absolute tons of waste to landfill metric, how much is actually leaving this event, showing up in a landfill. And then there's a relative metric, meaning how much of what we did here was the hotel and Meet Green and Green Circle able to divert. So in this example, if it's 5,000 tons, we divert, 10,000 tons to landfill, we have a 33% diversion rate. And over time for waste, it's either same, absolute reduction, or it's more diverted, meaning going from 33 to 50. So we can see in both those examples we have a number, a change, measured in the same way. Okay, so what are the core elements of these metrics? There is a unit of measure. There's some decision being made by the metric calculator or communicator about whether it's absolute or it's relative over time, or whether it's absolute or normalized across some other factor like square foot or event size or attendee, some other normalizing factor. The decision's been made here to just call it zero waste, absolute, irrespective of the number of attendees. There's a measurement methodology that we've developed that Green Circle is verifying, and relatedly an approach to verify the data. How do you track and make sure when you make an assertion, it is correct? And lastly, and this is probably most important, improvement that's comparable over time. So if you go to this event and have certain metrics, and you have another event in 2 years' time or 1 year's time, you can say, okay, we're using the same methodology and same data, and we can compare over time. So that's all core elements of this metric, or these metrics. Most of you know the term SMART metrics. Well, what does SMART stand for? It's specific, measurable. This one is, A is sometimes attainable, sometimes agreed upon. But I think agreed upon is really important for this space, because the metric we choose for sustainable purchasing must be one that is agreed upon by our purchasing teams, and our leaders, and our CPO, and our CEO. They must agree that this is a meaningful metric. And it's going to be realistic, meaning I can track it year over year, and time-bound so that I can show improvement over time. Okay, so what is our metric for sustainable purchasing? We're really early in this discussion. And so part of the reason to start as I did is I don't necessarily have the answers. I'm just proposing one potential direction after which there's a lot of work to do to get that right. But I truly believe that this direction is worth following. So in the purchasing community, the unit of measure is money. Dollars, pounds, lira, yen. And the key motivator, often, even for very, very advanced, sustainably minded purchasing professionals, the key measure is often economic savings. So the sustainability of the program is enabled by their ability to show economic savings over the life cycle of multiple products, over the life cycle of the program. So my proposed metric is sustainable spend percentage, and the narrative way to calculate that is spend on vendors and products and services, so services are included, that measurably results in meaningful positive benefits to people and planet. So both levers of sustainability, social and environmental, need to be measurably improved by spend by this organization. And this is also very important when compared to typical alternatives. So the important factor there is, what is the typical alternative, and what are we doing to divert from that typical alternative, whether it's a vendor or a service or a product, to something else? And then the denominator is addressable spend, because there's a lot of spend we won't be able to include for a long time until we get methodologies resolved. Ultimately, this might lead into, if things work out well and Sustain becomes a robust program, addressable goes away, and we're looking at total, and Sustain helps us quantify environmentally and socially beneficial products, services, and vendors, all three. So what's happening today? So my initial thoughts on how we do this is often is going to be informed by what's happening today. And the caveat is that there's methodological uncertainty today and tomorrow. Okay, so the thought experiment is, how do we measure purchasing today? How can we measure environmentally sustainable purchasing, socially sustainable purchasing, and economically sustainable purchasing? How do we try and bring it all together? So we measure purchasing by measuring spend per vendor. So in this example, we've got 10 vendors with a range of spend, from 3 million to 6 million total spend, 10 vendors, 5 million, 50 million in total. We also measure spend, so the same 50 million, we slice and dice it a different way and do it by category, by product category. So in this example, the same 50 million is now on the y-axis. Category 1, $9 million of spend. Category 5, $7 million of spend. Again, $50 million over 6 categories. So some in SPLC, particularly in cities, sustainable purchasing teams in cities, have been measuring EPP percentage, eco-preferable product spend percentage, focused on product category, and they've been doing this for years. So in this example, you've got a category of paper, 9 million, 3 million of that is on EPP based on their current definition of EPP, and therefore in that category, 33% of their spend is environmentally preferable. On aggregate, we've got 22 million of these 6 categories, 44% on aggregate, driven by the fact that 100% of this organization's spend is on green cleaning, defined by someone as green. Okay, in social sustainability, the tendency is not to focus on the product, but to focus on the vendor. And the most mature area of thinking right now in positive social benefits achieved by spend is through diversity. So in this example, vendor 7 and 8 are diverse. They're certified to some meaningful standard like WeBank or NMSDC, and therefore all their spend is characterized by these organizations as socially better because it's more inclusive. So in this example, you've still got the same 10 vendors. You've got 2 vendors who are diverse, and spend is 7 million, and therefore diverse spend percentage in this example is 14 million. Now, I said in social sustainability, it's primarily vendor-focused, apart from in a few categories. So fair trade, and where's Billy? Coffee is the perfect example because that's where I think you started. So in this example, in the category of coffee, there's a social sustainability overlay because you're talking about not environmental benefits of buying better coffee, but social benefits of buying better coffee through better worker rights, etc. And so in this example, 1% of product spend is socially preferable in some way, fair trade spend. See the $1 million at the bottom, and therefore 2%, 1 million out of 50 million, is socially sustainable because of fair trade. Right. Can we bring it all together? So, 6 categories, $50 million in spend. EPP spend percentage of 22 million, 44%. SPP spend percentage, socially preferable purchasing, that includes the diversity and the diversity and fair trade. But if the fair trade is not if the fair trade is not also eco-preferable, it doesn't count. So the line goes from overall spend 50 million to EPP spend of 22 million to SPP spend of 9 million, but sustainable spend of 8 million or 16% because you're excluding that fair trade that's only socially sustainable and not also environmentally preferable. That's the idea. We've tried to bring this to life a little bit at MGM. And where's Mark Buckley? My first sustainable purchasing effort after moving from Office Depot to MGM, ironically, was with Staples. And this paper is diverse. We got a good deal on it, thanks, Mark. And it's 30% recycled and FSC certified. That hits all buttons. I'd count that. Our LEDs, MGM's just retrofit its millionth LED. Much of that spend on our LED comes from a diverse distributor. Because of that, I'd count it in both buckets. It would count on the numerator. And just to close, a reminder, sustainability as it began in John Elkington's book, if you haven't read it, Cannibals with Forks. John Elkington first introduced this model. Sustainability is actions that are environmentally sound, economically feasible, and socially equitable. Sustainability is in the middle. I like the next chart as well, which is relative to the metrics conversation, because this is the chart used sometimes by the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants. They think about numbers. So economic growth on the top. Socioeconomic is about social progress and economic growth. Eco-efficiency is about economic growth and environmental stewardship. Social and environmental, and sustainability is in the middle. We've got lots of issues to resolve, but I won't go into them because I'm sure I'm over my time. 9 minutes.
So, thank you, Yilmaz. You didn't realize it, but you are in the process of becoming inculcated into the world of sustainable purchasing policy wonks. And I'm not going to deviate from that tradition with my presentation. We did a lot of math in Yilmaz's. We're going to do some in mine as well. But first, sustainable purchasing means making sure that the goods and services an organization buys achieve value for money and generate benefits not only for the organization, but also for the environment, society, and the economy. And if we pull that definition apart for the purpose of creating metrics, we find that our definition of sustainable purchasing includes goals that are shared with conventional purchasing, goals for which purchasing organizations typically already have metrics because they've already been measuring their success against these goals. What is new in sustainable purchasing is the idea that an organization would not only seek internal benefits from its purchasing, it will also seek to generate external benefits to environment, society, and the economy. Most purchasing organizations do not have tried and true metrics for assessing how well they are delivering on these newer goals. So although SPLC includes both internal and external benefits in its definition of sustainable purchasing, we tend to focus on helping to create resources that can address an organization's efforts to generate external benefits to environment, society, and the economy. If we think about the types of metrics that we would want to use in order to measure the success of our sustainable purchasing programs, ideally, we would want to measure the impact of an entire program, the external benefits that it delivers, out in the world. But today, we do not have credible methods or adequate data for doing that. And there would be significant challenges to standardizing such a metric across diverse organizations. So I'm going to talk about two other types of metrics which I do think we have the tools today to implement, and which together can get us pretty close to the goal of measuring the impact of a program in the world. First, I'll talk about metrics at the scale of a category or strategy that measure impact in the world. And second, I will talk about metrics at the scale of a program that measure the maturity of the program, and then how those connect. Starting with metrics at the scale of a category or strategy that measure impact in the world, let's look at an example. Let's take the hypothetical example of a university with 2,000 students in residence, and the university is interested in reducing its supply chain GHG emissions related to food services. Let's say that conventional food products generate, on average, 10 tons of CO2 emissions per ton of food. This is a conservative estimate. And that sustainable food products, for example, food products that are certified to standards reviewed by the proposed SPLC Sustain program, generate, on average, 9 tons of CO2 emissions per ton of food, a 10% improvement over conventional. And let's say that 50% of the food purchased by the university qualifies as sustainable, and that each student consumes 460 pounds of food per year. We're getting into wonk land. Then the university will end up purchasing 230 tons of conventional food products and 230 tons of sustainable food products per year, resulting in a total of 4,370 estimated tons of GHG emissions per year. To reduce these total so-called Scope 3 emissions, the university could increase the proportion of sustainable spend to 75% or 100%, which would achieve reductions of 2.5% and 5% respectively in estimated GHG emissions. But if the university referred to SPLC's guidance for leadership in sustainable purchasing, it might focus on the number of pounds being purchased per student and see if it could reduce that amount through a variety of solution strategies suggested in the guidance. Implementing all of these strategies might reduce the pounds of food purchased per student per year by 30%. To 320 pounds per student per year. In this case, even if only 25% of that food qualified as sustainable, say under the SUSTAIN program, the university would still achieve GHG reductions of 29%. And even if none of that food qualified as sustainable, the university would still achieve GHG reductions of 27%. So, if we're looking for a metric that would accurately reflect the level of external benefits achieved, percent sustainable spend doesn't really reflect the level of external benefits in terms of GHG emission reductions. Instead, we might incline to use a metric like pounds of food purchased per student per year, regardless of the level of sustainability of the food itself, since there is a direct correlation between the pounds of food per student and the level of GHG emissions, and that correlation is a powerful argument for this as a metric. And I'm not suggesting that these are mutually exclusive. You could do both and you get all the benefits. Okay, so if that's an example of what it looks like to identify a good metric to measure category impact, now I want to talk about how those types of category impact metrics can link to metrics that measure the maturity of an entire sustainable purchasing program. And this is where SPLC benchmark comes in. Benchmark assesses the maturity of an entire sustainable purchasing program based on both internal and external benefits, but I will focus on how benchmark addresses a program's delivery of external benefits to environment, society, and economy. As you'll recall from yesterday's presentation, benchmark assesses the level of maturity from initiating to leading that an organization has achieved in each of 5 areas: understanding, commitment, results, innovation, and transparency. I'm going to focus on the first 3 sections, which are directly tied to measuring the external benefits of specific strategies. To achieve a leading level of maturity in the understanding section, the scope of a sustainable purchasing program must include all relevant environmental, social, and economic impacts identified through a credible analysis of its spending. To achieve a leading level of maturity in the commitment section, a sustainable purchasing program must commit to a set of priority strategies that address at least 75% of the relevant environmental, social, and economic impacts identified in the analysis. And to achieve a leading level of maturity in the results section, a program must fully achieve the goals for at least 3 of these priority strategies. And that's a high bar, and we intentionally expect that it would be a high bar. There are lower levels of maturity for lower bars. We assume that different organizations will have different priority strategies based on different spend profiles, different values, and different stakeholders. As an organization develops each of its priority strategies, SPLC encourages considering a range of possible solution strategies. In the example of the university that has set food supply chain GHG emissions as a priority, it has focused on solution strategies likely to reduce pounds of food consumed per student, like behavior change through, say, education programs to encourage healthier eating, combining actions through including waste management and linked incentives in the food service contract, efficiency through reducing food waste in the kitchen, and process change through portion sizing or removing trays from cafeterias to discourage overconsumption. Benchmark encourages and rewards this type of strategic approach. So from SPLC's perspective, it is appropriate that we as a community have multiple metrics at multiple levels. Metrics that measure the external benefits of a category or strategy, and metrics that measure the maturity of a program, including whether the program is strategic in its priorities. Oops. Let me go back. Thank you. Organizations may create internal scorecards that are unique to their priorities and which may also address how their sustainable purchasing program links to larger organizational priorities. And SPLC will drive convergence in the metrics that organizations use at the scale of a program as a whole or at the scale of a category or strategy. Organizations may compare themselves on the basis of their level of maturity, or they may compare themselves on the basis of their performance against shared metrics for a particular strategy, such as food GHG reduction, or the percentage of their spend that is certified to sustain recognized standards. It's appropriate that organizations select program priorities that align with their larger organizational priorities, and it is appropriate that they select metrics that are likely to assess the extent to which their priority strategies deliver external benefits. Whether their program priorities happen to be GHG reduction, or supply chain diversity, or labor rights, or any of the many other areas in which an organization could seek to achieve external benefits to environment, society, and economy. This is the vision that we put forward for the role of SPLC, providing resources to help leadership organizations, resources to help them establish metrics that are appropriate to their priorities, resources to deliver success against those priorities, resources to benchmark their progress, and resources to drive convergence, so that we are all increasingly using the same metrics to measure our progress when we happen to share the same priorities. Thank you.
So we heard 3 different models, in case that wasn't clear. We had a case from Yalmaz that was one metric, essentially percentage sustainable spend.
Right.
And there were several steps to get there, but in the end, it's percent sustainable spend.
Right.
Okay, then we had from Jason 2 options. One is really measuring from the impact side with the greenhouse gas example and food services, and how that really then opens the door to some other strategies. The third option then he presented was to really think about, well, why don't we just measure those activities? So that's really like a process type of measure of what things you are doing. And now we're going to hear from Tim as to whether these stories would resonate in his organization if you were to use each of these 3 options or one of them with the people you're trying to communicate with about sustainable purchasing.
So first of all, I'm surprised you're all here because there's nothing like metrics in the morning. Holy cow. I expected to see everybody get up and run. And I also noticed I'm intimidated because Yalmaz is taking his counterpoint notes for the debate. he was trained really well. For me, it's interesting because it really depends on the audience. And I'm a real pragmatist as to how we need to use these measures for different purposes, different audiences within our organization. Sorry, my voice has gone from bowling last night too. So, we have a variety of measures that, at a very high level, are very important for our investment community and our senior management as beacons of where we're going as a company. So, if you look at Best Buy, we're very proud of our CDP rating at 100% year over year over year. And that means a lot to our senior executives because that's how they explain our company to the investors. And those investors know that there's a higher return on companies that are sustainable because they're more creative, more innovative, they are moving things forward, and they know that that's what our customers want. We're also proud of things like our HRC Corporate Equality Index on a different dimension to look at us as an inclusive environment. So those measures are really important for the audience of the investor community, our senior management, those that really need that higher level measure of our performance as a company and the culture of our company. If you think of other folks that we need to communicate with, if you look at our supplier community, we have expectations. We publish through our RFPs and through our statements. We don't have policies around procurement. But we do have statements, so our chemical statement, our paper statement, and so forth, that set the standards by which we are going to purchase and how we're going to continue to invest in improvement in those purchasing behaviors. So just setting the expectations out there so that our suppliers know what they can do to win more business with us and what we're going to be expecting from them. We also have NGOs and other stakeholders that need a variety of things depending on the category of that performance. For our purchasing organization, because I am a purchasing guy, and I was going to use the line that would get lost on everybody, I am but merely a caveman. I don't know if anybody remembers that from Saturday Night Live, Phil Hartman. I am but merely a caveman. I don't understand these principles. These, you can YouTube it. It's Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer. Anyway, this stuff is really sophisticated, and it's very complicated, as we just heard, and it's all incredibly important. Our constituents are getting smarter and smarter about the details around sustainability, and we need to be asking those questions. For example, we have a strong supplier diversity program. Our goal is 10% of our addressable spend by 2020. When I sign up a WeBank certified women-owned business, I actually want to ask more questions beyond the certification about the impact, how many women are employed within their company, how many women advance into the management ranks within their company, not just are they owned by a woman. Right? So I want to understand what our dollars, how they're going to fund minority development, economic development enablement in those communities and with those constituents. So people do start to understand a little bit more. For my procurement team, though, we do have percent spend goals because we have to have a driver. I have to get the attention of folks. I'm alarmed that 30% of my procurement team doesn't believe in climate change. And the human impacts on climate change, but that's a reality. So I have to set that standard that we're going to address it, and then find the passionate people that are going to dig into each category and try to drive a more relevant information for the tasks that we're going after. The other thing that is critically important is I look at sustainability as storytelling. Right? And for me to drive engagement and education of our stakeholders, it's got to be interesting. We talked about this at the CPO roundtable yesterday. We're all at a different place as far as our maturity of our programs. And one of the common things is for us to drive engagement, I have to be able to tell a story. So a perfect example of that, and we've got a lot of examples, so I'll mention 3. We recently had one where we switched out all of our paper towels in our bathrooms from the bleached, nice paper towels that everybody was accustomed to a natural fiber recycled paper. An uproar in our organization. So we had a company town hall with hundreds of people there, and that was the first question that was asked: when can we switch to the old paper towels? Right? And I had to stand up and tell the story of how this switch to paper towels got harmful bleach out of the environment. These paper towels took 500,000 less gallons of water to produce. For us, that this was an environmental play. So get over yourself and your, Devo white, nice soft paper towels, and think more broadly about what we need as an organization, what we should be thinking about. Other examples where we can emphasize, we did a lighting retrofit that eliminated, or essentially it was the equivalent of 15,000 homes. And that was important. So putting things in those terms, or a conversion to our Geek Squad Prius that saved 140,000 gallons of gas in the first 6 months last year, those are significant things that our stakeholders can get their arms around, and it really drives my team to have passion about what we do because they can tell those really cool stories, and hopefully not put it on their resume. So it really depends on the audience.
Well, thank you for those examples. What I hear from that final example in terms of your internal stakeholders is really that the final outcomes or the impacts of these activities are what resonates with them. And so while you may be measuring percentage sustainable spend, that's not the answer to the question, why are we doing this?
It is, so we take the chance to emphasize our percent to spend measures, in that statement, in that blog, in whatever it is that we're trying to communicate to whichever stakeholder. We will say it is our mission to do these things, and we measure it. And this is a component of it, this specific project, so that's very important.
So the biggest question I hear is, or the proposal from Tim is that measure sustainable spend, but express the why behind the sustainable spend using clear impact reduction measures, such as GHG reduced or water reduced or chemicals avoided. So I think we should have a conversation about how those assertions get made around impacts reduced. And this ties directly to the example you gave, Jason. And I think in your example around the university's food, you made either one or both of two big assumptions. One, that the university can accurately capture and calculate their greenhouse gas emissions for all the SKUs of food that they buy, and that might be tens of thousands of SKUs. So, and accurate. You either made that assumption, or you assume that the university is relying on industry average-based metrics for different agricultural commodities, this much embedded greenhouse gases. So if you assume the first, you assume that university has done all that digging and spent a couple of $1 million to do life cycle assessments for their whole food spend. And if you assume the industry average, then it's useful but not accurate in a true metric, in an accurate defensible metric manner to say this impact was reduced by changing from this to this. And the reason is, a lot of life cycle science-based impact metrics are based on industry averages. And they're necessarily based on industry averages because if you didn't do industry averages, you need to go to every factory and look at every supply chain and measure every environmental footprint across that supply chain, whether it's water, materials, toxicity, greenhouse gases, energy use. You'd have to do it all for every SKU, for every vendor. Impossible. So you have to rely on industry averages, and yes, we can do some more work on developing industry average calculators that are more comparable and a bit more defensible. But so those are my two concerns about focusing our effort as a community on impact reduction metrics, given those two issues. And lastly, I think what you proposed are really waste reduction metrics. So portion size. That's a reduced size of ultimately it might show up in reduced spend, but it's a waste reduction metric, and even if you calculate waste reduction, the way it might show up in sustainable spend, that single metric, is that when you buy less, the denominator will reduce, right? And then if you've got zero socially environmentally social and environmental spend on food on the numerator, then all you're doing, you're just buying less. And that might be the only thing you want, but we also want to send signals for social and environmental preferability across multiple attributes, including human rights and water reduction and that whole range of positive benefits we want to drive. And so I think what you proposed as the second metric is problematic because of those two industry average and primary data issues, but are addressed already in the behaviors that a purchaser or the university would pursue to drive that metric in a way that's positive.
So I think this may still not be on, so if I may, thank you. So first of all, thank you, Yilmaz. And to the first point, with respect to the use of LCA and the references to LCA and LCA methodologies, I would say that LCA is a red herring, and that the way in which objections to the type of math that I presented to you are framed in terms of the details of LCA are a red herring, because what I showed you was a scale difference of roughly a factor of 10. That is, the difference between a 10% difference in conventional versus sustainable spend, producing for that university between 2.5% and 5% reductions, versus being able to achieve a 30% reduction in total food consumed, delivering for them a 30% reduction in GHG emissions. Now, absolutely, I would prefer that they be doing both. That is, that they have 100% sustainable spend and they be doing food waste reduction. What I would not want them to do is start with 100% sustainable spend and then worry about the food waste reduction later. That would be non-strategic. And the important message that SPLC has been delivering, and the reason that we are very happy to have CPOs on our main stage and CPOs in this audience, is because we recognize that to do sustainable purchasing is a question of leadership, and that the CPO is the head of that procurement function. and has a responsibility as a leader to be understanding the strategic role that procurement plays within the organization. And so from the perspective of the program as a whole, it is absolutely appropriate that the procurement function should be involved in conversations about whether or not the institution is implementing appropriate waste reduction strategies in order to achieve reductions in spend, which the organization can legitimately see as a contribution to their overall organizational priorities around, for example, GHG reductions. So my point is that absolutely, perhaps within the team, it may be appropriate to be using percent sustainable spend within certain contexts. I would not want an entire sustainable purchasing program to say our metric for success is percent sustainable spend. I would want that program to be saying our metric for success is, are we being strategic? And that's what the maturity model gets you, is a guarantee that you're being strategic and that you're thinking appropriately about how to address the unique aspects of your own spend, and where there are eco-labels and standards within a category that can deliver for you significant, meaningful reductions that are appropriate to that category, then the percent sustainable spend metric works, and the SUSTAIN program will work for you. There may not be today categories where that works, and those categories where there are not yet appropriate standards and certifications and appropriate definition of what sustainable spend means, they might be your most impactful categories. And so I see a real risk if we oversimplify this. I think it's absolutely appropriate to be developing, as you suggested, Yilmaz, the deep math that will be required to get to a percent sustainable spend metric and to be helping organizations to use that metric. I just wouldn't want us to use that as a metric for an entire program, and I wouldn't want that to be, for example, Tim's metric for his program. Coming back to the LCA red herring, the reason I say it's a red herring is that I was in a session yesterday in which I felt that LCA was being used, people were getting themselves wrapped around the flagpole of LCA. And one of the presenters suggested that LCA is more of a telescope than a microscope. And the way that I say that is LCA provides you directional information. And I do think that we have sufficiently sophisticated sector-level LCA models that can tell you that on average your food is giving you, on average, this level of GHG impacts without you having to drill down into 10,000 SKUs. And that information can give you directional, strategic guidance on where you should be prioritizing, for example, on your food waste first.
If I could, you're both right. I'm terrible at debates. It is important, and Jason's point is right on. As a procurement professional, demand management is like #1 priority. If we can eliminate the need for things, especially on the environmental side, that's our first order of business, is to buy less. My company even made a procurement video, sounds really exciting, that we use to educate our stakeholders, and it's called Do We Need It? And asking that question of, are you managing demand effectively? On the environmental side, it's always starts with a demand management question. Do we have to be buying this? And for what we are buying, what certifications, what labels do we need on that? From a social perspective, it's typically for us, about investing more, right? And investing more with diverse companies, investing more with companies that are socially responsible and measuring spend in that way. So I think it's both, right? And it depends on what category you're looking at and what element of sustainability you're talking about.
So, thank you, Tim, for that intervention. I think this one should be ready now. One thing I'm hearing here is that there are benefits being created from sustainable purchasing. It's hard to measure them. The other dimension I'd like to bring in is kind of who's receiving the benefits. So Jason implied this with the internal and the external measures, but from a demand reduction point of view, Best Buy is receiving the benefits from reducing that longer term in the world, potentially also environmental benefits from doing that. But if you have that reduction, are you then using that money to buy something else instead? And this is a question in this field, which is known as a rebound effect, because you're becoming more efficient. So what do you do with that extra cash that you now have? Are you going? What are you spending it on?
Spend it on socially and environmentally preferable products to drive your metric up. You're spending less, denominator lower, spending better, social and environmental up, total cost neutral.
Right. I would say I'm not allowed to spend the money. So if we save money on demand reduction, for example, we right-sized our e-commerce packaging a couple years ago, and because we ship about 30 million packages per year e-commerce, which is a lot, and it's not compared to some of our competitors. We reduced the size of the boxes to meet the product that we were shipping, so we don't have to fill air pillows in it. It was more productive for our labor, and we took 440 tons of corrugate out of the network. And we converted to all FSC certified corrugate at that point. So you can do both, and if you can layer those in to the same objective,
yeah.
And as a procurement professional, if you're saving money, it affords you the opportunity to do other more creative things that may have cost you more if you wanted to make that decision otherwise.
Right.
Two comments on that. One is, I think that if you are being strategic, that is, if as an organization you are being strategic and you've looked at your spend and identified a particular category as highly impactful, and then you've achieved demand reduction in that category, you can safely assume that the money, even if you do end up spending that money back on another category of spend, it will, generally speaking, be a lower impact category of spend for the very reason that you've already done the analysis to figure out what was the high impact category, and you started there. Won't always be the case. It doesn't mean that we as an organization should not, those of us who are on the wonky side and enjoy this kind of thing, talk about rebound effects and think about them. But generally speaking, I think that too, we shouldn't get ourselves wrapped too tied in knots about that. The other comment I wanted to pick up on from Tim was the storytelling, because it resonates very powerfully with what I heard in a Chatham House meeting, so I can't name names, but a Chatham House meeting of CPOs from major federal agencies. And the CPO from one of the largest spend agencies in the federal government shared the fact that she is frequently in a situation where her procurement managers are dealing with their program customers, in effect, for whom they are buying. And their program customers are deeply frustrated by the federal mandates that are driven by federal policy on issues like environmental or social concerns, small business allotments, or environmental preferability of products. And the procurement managers are having to implement those mandates. Their internal customers are frustrated when those mandates are getting in the way of what they see as their mission delivery. And what she explained was that what she saw the role of leadership, and this speaks to our role as leaders, what she understood as her role in leadership was to provide her procurement managers with the education tools, the stories that they needed to help those customers understand why, in fact, those mandates were not a deviation from their agency's mission, that they were absolutely integral to the mission of the federal government writ large, and that the agency should be supporting that mission. And so absolutely those purchasing managers became educators and storytellers in helping their customers understand why the mandates made sense, should not be a frustration, but should be something to be embraced.
I've just one comment to align a little bit with Jason's view in that I think LCA can and should, industry average LCA can and should be used for prioritization, as is one of the key messages of SPLC from its start. So that sustainable spend percentage, if it was only across the entire portfolio of organizations' spend, and therefore they were doing all these social and environmentally good things over there, but there's one category in which there's relatively low spend, but as the highest impact, then we should use LCA to find those categories, and so sustainable spend percentage in priority categories is a second layer that I think is important. And lastly, I'm hiring someone to do this work for MGM.
Go and see
So
others.
come and see
that's
me
an
if
outcome
you're
of
a
this
junior
session.
role, so not too senior, but I'm hiring.
So we're out of time, but I wanted to say that I can foresee a dashboard in our future with several metrics that you use in some cases for some audiences and in others for other purposes, say for a management tool versus a reporting tool. We want you as a community to help SPLC to help create those sorts of metrics within all of the different programs, within Sustain, within Benchmark, within the guidance and other sort of product category work that we're doing, and ideally we all use a similar approach so that we can start to have some best practices on how to do this and use the same sort of set of resources so we're not creating more confusion. And I hope this was an enlightening and useful discussion to you this morning. We want to continue the conversation, so please join us in that. And I think at this point we're going to a break directly. Joan, are you coming back up here? Okay, Joan's coming back up. Thank you very much.
Wow, this is part of why I love SPLC. Greatly informative and exciting. What I wish is that we had time for a salon now, that we could all get together after this and debate this ourselves around a glass of wine with each other and talk about this further. Maybe we can do that in local groups. Maybe we'll have a working group on these issues. But I think it's something well worth further thinking, and it's clear we have such great resources in our community, great thinkers and passionate people that come together around the issues we all care about. So thank you very much for that discussion, Tim, Anastasia, Jason, and Yamaz. We're going to have 2 more rounds of breakout sessions, and then we will see you in the Windows room, which is where we had the SPLC Connect, if you were here on Monday, where we got to see that amazing hailstorm. That's where we're going to have our final session. And in that plenary, we will talk about post-summit engagement opportunities. We'll have the Silly Awards and debrief a bit on what we've learned over the course of the summit. So the next set of concurrent sessions start at 10:10. So have a nice break and go visit our exhibitors.